Hello everyone, and welcome back to Void Wolf Studios for our probably final part, well, unless we start looking into some special characters at least, to the Ork series that we've been doing. And I say possibly the biggest bruiser for last, and that would be the Ork Warboss. Funny thing about an Ork Warboss, you'd think that he was made up of really the biggest, baddest, meanest orc around, but that's not necessarily the case. Big mechs can technically be a warboss, in that they will lead wargs and, orc tribes and all that kind of thing. Sometimes even a weird boy could potentially lead an orc warg, but 9 times out of 10, an orc warboss is usually the biggest, meanest, baddest orc amongst the bunch, and he will have been an orc boy fighting his way all the way up through the ranks, getting to the knob stage, and then eventually deciding that this current warboss is a bit of a wimp and would probably just bite off his head, and might makes right kind of thing. Clearly, if he defeats the previous warboss, he was meant to be the warboss all along, and Gork and Mork want this to happen, so yay, fun times. They tend to carry fairly similar sets of tools because orcs, well, orc mentalities tend to go in relatively similar ways. You can have an orc warboss with chopper and a slugger, that's perfectly normal to a relatively small warg. But the bigger the warg gets, the more loot the orc gets, and the more mechs, the more pain boys, the more everything that turn up. And this tends to mean that an orc warboss can just have better and bigger kit. So an orc warboss might start out with just his slugger chopper, but when his warg gets big enough, he could be wearing mega armor with power claws and kill saws and combi mega blasters and mega shooters and all kinds of fun gizmos and gadgets, and also have partly cybernetic limbs thanks to the local pain boy that he's paid sensibly enough to make sure that he gets the best gubbins and bits. Often a warboss will also have a pet squig, because squigs are hilarious. Oh yeah, better do a separate video on squigs. But anyway, squigs are hilarious, these little bouncing space hoppers with teeth. Yeah, a warboss rather likes having one of these things around, because even though he can't convince the thing to stop biting him, he can convince it to bite other people, which is incredibly handy because it not only acts as an attack dog, but also as an early warning system in case someone tries to sneak up on him, which frankly happens more often than you might think. The Imperium love to just kill warbosses with Space Marines making assassin runs, or, well, using bog standard assassins with a sniper round. Because when you destroy the focus for the Ork Warg, which tends to be the warboss, then that tends to mean that the Ork Warg will dissipate into infighting and chaos relatively quickly, and not the good kind of chaos. This is the kind of chaos where Ork Wargs kind of implode and form lots of smaller bands, which, with the Imperial Guard, Space Marines, and other forces the Imperium has on offer, it's relatively easy then to just mop them up as they become smaller wargs that don't help one another. And whilst in the codex, current codex I should add, whilst in the current codex, you don't actually get an option to have an Ork Warboss with mega armor on. In the fluff, this happens more often than not. Ork Warbosses will take the best bits they can get their hands on and, well, make it their own, effectively. The only exemption to this, currently, for the Orcs, is Gazgul Maguruk Thraka. And that is because he is, well, he's Gazgul. He is a very interesting little character all by himself, and he's been restored thanks to Mad Doc Grotznik to life again after having his head chopped off by Ragnar. Gazgul's been in many scrapes that have required Mad Doc Grotznik to fix him up, and each time he's been fixed up he's just been given a bigger and better suit of mega armor. And this current edition has definitely been his biggest and most insane construction yet. But for the average Ork Warboss, they kind of have to make do with slightly heavier leathers and some plates. And yeah, you could of course choose to have your Warboss riding around on a bike, which is perfectly normal. There is now an individual Ork Warboss on a trike that you can get, where essentially the Warboss stands on the trike with his power claw and just snips and grabs and pulls and, yeah, just makes a complete mess of everyone around him. But by far the most common variant of an Ork Warboss will be the one who's on foot. And what does an Ork Warboss do once he gets to the Ork Warboss stature? What's our new budding Warboss do? Well, first off, he has to crump, kill, splatter and maim anyone who he thinks might be a challenge to him in the future, whilst keeping the ones who are strong enough with him, who he knows he can, I I would say trust, but that might be a bit of a strong word, count on to get into the violence, shall we say, on his word. So once he's crumped enough heads and made sure everyone knows who's the boss now, he will inevitably wish to extend the size of his warg, which is pretty darn normal. And this will tend to result in encountering another Ork warg, or Ork tribe, and finding their warboss, where he proceeds to punch them in the face. In this way, the warg will continue to grow, get bigger, get more cool tech and support, and eventually become a galactic scale warg, which is terrifying for the Imperium because they've had a couple of these and they've come really close to wiping out all of humanity. In fact, way before the Horus Heresy, there was an Ork Warboss who was as big as a knight that the Emperor had to fight almost single-handedly. And this Warboss was nothing to be sniffed at. He wasn't just big, he was fast, able to just completely wreck everything around him. Which is all down to the fact that Ork biology is so amazing in that every time they win, they get that adrenaline boost, and this inevitably increases their size and mass to the point where, well, they can become that big. Although these kinds of specimens are ridiculously rare. Ork infighting and assassinations from the Imperium, Eldar and everyone else basically mean that Ork Warbosses almost never reach these kinds of sizes. Although an Ork Warboss, on average, will typically tower over your poor human, probably at least by 2 to 3 times their height, and well over 4 times their mass. These warbosses are so strong that most of the time they can pick up a human and just crush their skull in the palm of their hand. It is not a situation you wish to be in at any point in time, but it's a bit tricky to talk about any more than this because an Ork Warboss right now, you're limited to one of 2 choices, unless you take Ghazghkull. You have your Ork Warboss on foot with his attack squig, or you can have an Ork Warboss on a bike with the new model that GW released with the funky grabbing grapple claw. Or Ghazghkull, as I said, who's a special character. I feel a little bad, honestly, because this one's a bit on the short side. So I will try and release some extra videos, either before this or after this, because, yeah, I feel like I've not given you enough info there, but there's not really a whole lot more to tell. So, if you guys want to hear a different faction for the 40k series, please put a little comment down below. Thank you all so much to the new and current subscribers. It means a massive amount to me, all the cool stuff you've been doing, saying, commenting, and I look forward to hearing from you all soon. Until then, take care everyone.